So starting with number 16, I haven't taken into account re-signings. I thought about it, but I thought that would just make things a bit more confusing. So I'm just strictly looking at gains and losses here. And some teams I'm also looking at what they needed, if they addressed it or not. And other teams I'm just looking at exactly the gains and losses. So number 16 might be a little bit harsh, but I'm going the Brisbane Broncos. There's a huge question mark here with Cameron Smith. He has not yet decided where he's going to play. It's all but confirmed that he's not going to be playing at the Storm, and it now looks between the Broncos and the Titans. And the new rule change that players can move clubs all the way up until August has basically says that he doesn't have to make his choice till then. So that would be an interesting situation if he didn't choose till August who he's going to play for. But I think Brisbane's a likely candidate. I just think it would be cool to see him go to the Titans because I think then all of a sudden they would be a genuine top 4 contender. But I think Brisbane, that would probably explain why they've been so quiet in this transfer window. Or this, I probably will call it a transfer window as a soccer fan, but you know what I mean. So looking at their gains, they've gained David Mead and Dale Copley. Look, I don't even know if they're going to be starting for them. At best, they'll just be on the wing. Copley might play in the centres, but they're pretty decent outside backs anyway, so strange signings. And John Asiata is coming down from North Queensland, who I think is a little bit of an overrated player, really. I'm not sure about that ball-playing prop sort of style he plays. Maybe he moves into a lock and Carrigan moves into the prop. That would make a bit more sense, but I still think he's got to run a bit harder and focus a little bit less on the playmaking at times. He legit does play like a half when sometimes out of your forward pack you do need a bit more running. So he will probably be in the starting 13. Not sure about Copley and Mead. And then they've lost Darius Boyd to retirement, David Fafita, the big one, to the Gold Coast Titans, and then they've also lost Jack Bird and Andrew McCulloch and Joe Alfahangawi. So quite a few starting players there. Obviously Jack Bird, he's a big name, but you can't be too harsh on the Broncos because he hardly got on the park for them through injury. David Fafita is the big loss. That was announced last year. And Joe Hoffa-Ngowi, yes, he hasn't been as good in the last few years, but at stages he was one of the better forwards in the game. Andrew McCulloch as well, we kind of knew he was going to be moved on, but yeah, that's not great either. So just in terms of looking at their starting 13, to me they've lost 3 or 4 players, and they've only put in Asiata, who's might not even start. He might be a bench player at best. So if they don't bring in Cam Smith, I think they've had a pretty awful off-season, and when you consider what they needed to do after last year, it's pretty harrowing. So I kind of respect what they're doing by just simply putting faith in the young guns, blokes like Tessie New, Jordan Ricky and stuff like that. But yeah, for a big club, if they want success this year, I think they've not really addressed many issues that they have. Moving into 15th, this is on the other side of the Broncos in terms of ability, but the Canberra Raiders. So I've been a bit harsh on a few of the big teams, but keep in mind that they don't really need to make too many changes because they were great last year, and the Raiders are one of those teams. If we're looking at their main ins and outs, they've brought in Caleb Aikens from the Panthers, Ryan James from the Titans, and they've lost John Bateman, Nick Kotrick, and Michael Oldfield, the main people of note. Ryan James is a good in. Obviously hasn't played the last couple seasons due to injuries. Caleb Aikens, he won't play because of Shans unless he plays in the outside backs, but he will just be a solid backup there. And big loss of John Bateman. For me, I had them like middle table, and then I remembered how big of a loss John Bateman will actually be. So he's gone. And then Nick Kotrick, I actually don't think it's that big of a loss because I do think blokes who play on the wing or in the centre, centres is important, but especially the wingers, they're a little bit more expendable. Like, he's a good player and stuff, but I think it's not going to completely ruin the team, if you know what I mean. And Michael Oldfield was just kind of a utility depth player. But yeah, huge loss in John Bateman. Yes, they've brought in Ryan James, but with the injury cloud over his head over the last few years, we're not sure if he's still the same player that he once was. So hard to see too many improvements to the starting 13 for the Raiders, but it has to be said, I don't think they needed too many improvements. Obviously, Josh Hodgson will be back, so it'll be interesting to see what they do with blokes like Starling, who had a pretty good year last year. It's going to be tough to see him get too many games this year, but we'll see how they tackle that one up in Canberra. At number 14, I've got the Melbourne Storm. once again, I'm not saying they're going to be bad by any means, but just haven't really brought in anyone of note. They brought in George Jennings and Remus Smith. Both probably won't start. They might, who knows. A bit like last year when they had blokes like Brenko Lee, Paul Momorowski just playing a couple games here or there. So they might be in that sort of situation. I'm sure Melbourne Storm will get everything they can out of those two players because that's what they seem to do. But yeah, not really huge ins, are they? And they've lost Tino Fasul Malawi. Paul Momorowski obviously wasn't really there. He was on loan. And then they lost Suliasi Vunivalu, who I think was a good player, but I do think he was a little bit overrated. But yeah, I think Tino Fasul Malawi is a pretty big loss. I think he has a big future in the game. And I'm quite surprised the Storm let him go. They usually just let the expendable guys go who they've got the most out of. But I do think Fasul Malawi is an interesting release from them. Well, obviously it might not have been their choice. It might have just been his. So yeah, not really any notable ins and a few big losses. I guess Harry Grant's coming back from his loan spell to the Tigers. So I guess that's an in. But then also if you look at Cameron Smith as an out. And yeah, so not too many changes for the Storm in terms of starting 13. In terms of predictions, I'm not going to talk too much about predictions this episode because I'm going to be looking to do one, hopefully with my dad, maybe my brother as well, or maybe just by myself in the next few days before the season starts. So stay tuned for that one. Indeed. Next up in number 13, I've got the St. George Illawarra Dragons. They're a tough side to judge with their off-season signings. They've brought in Daniel Alvaro, who at one point was a pretty good front row. He's kind of gone by the wayside in recent years, was struggling to get game time, went on loan to the Warriors, and now he's ended up at the Dragons. Jack Bird, he was obviously once a very good player, played State of Origin, has struggled with injury. I do think he will be a very good player. It's just whether he can stay on the park. They've also brought in Poasa Famasuli from the Roosters, who went on loan to the Warriors, and also Andrew McCulloch from the Broncos. But yeah, interesting to see. So not too many good ins there, nothing outrageous, but pretty handy ins as well. But then I think they had some big losses. Tyson Frizzell going to the Knights, I think that's a fairly big loss. Obviously James Graham retired halfway through the season last year. They lost Jacob Host, they lost Tim Laffey, they lost Jason Saab, Tristan Saylor, Corbin Sims, who are all kind of there or thereabouts on the bench. And they also lost Ewan Aitken, who I think was a pretty underrated player at the Dragons. So quite a few losses, not too many that will damage the starting 13, except for maybe Tyson Frizzell. But yeah, a lot less depth, and I just don't think they brought in as many players as they should have, or the kind of talent that they needed to. I do think they have a lot of salary cap tied in with Ben Hunt and Corey Norman, but yeah, interested to see how the Dragons go this year.
It's a miracle! Oh yeah! What about that one? Unbelievable! Balotelli, Aguero! Crowd cheers. Here's Siddle.